Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation about the future of breast cancer care. My name is Corona Gainford, and I am the Global Medical Lead for Breast Cancer here at Sanofi Genzyme. It is my pleasure to be here alongside my colleague Maysoon Shamali, who is a Senior Principal Scientist and Lab Head for Sanofi Oncology Research. We are joined by Jamil Rivers, who is the founder and CEO of the Chrysalis Initiative. And Jamil works tirelessly elevating the voices of patients to shine a light on areas of unmet need. Today, our discussion will focus on the next chapter of breast cancer care, looking at what new solutions may be needed in the fight against metastatic breast cancer, and how the scientific and patient communities can and must work together to overcome new challenges in advancing breast cancer care. So there are many gaps in care throughout the cancer patient journey, which are not new. However, COVID-19 has added many new barriers and amplified existing ones. Patient care has been disrupted, causing many patients to postpone critical cancer screenings. And this is particularly problematic for women as it relates to breast cancer. Now, as we begin to emerge from the pandemic, we're concerned that these disruptions in screening could lead to delayed or missed diagnoses of cancer. And because cancers diagnosed at later stages are generally harder to treat, the potential impact on patient outcomes is becoming more and more of a concern for us. This week marks the American Society of Clinical Oncology 2021 annual meeting. And this week, the global community gathers virtually to discuss the latest research efforts. We all recognize that it will take organized and sustained action to promote the delivery of high-quality cancer care, especially in the post-COVID era. One of the many reasons I'm looking forward to this discussion is the opportunity to hear two distinct perspectives on innovations in care and the unmet need that currently exists along the patient journey. Maysoon will talk about the latest work being done by Sanofi in breast cancer research. And we will hear from Jamil about patients' lived experiences and needs as they navigate cancer treatment in this continually evolving landscape. So without further ado, let's get started. There's a lot to discuss today. So first of all, let's focus on the biggest unmet need. We know this past year, women's health screenings have fallen sharply, with breast cancer monitoring decreasing by 17% and more significant declines in areas where the outbreak was strongest. So Maysoon, maybe we'll start with you. What are currently the biggest treatment challenges in breast cancer?
Thank you, Corona. I'm really happy to take part in this discussion today and really happy to have Jamil join us from Chrysalis Initiative. You touched upon this in your introduction. One of the main challenges, you noted was that early detection is really critical in the fight against cancer, including having timely breast cancer screenings. We've seen this rise in the delay of screenings by patients due to the pandemic. And that means that our patients aren't being diagnosed until much later stages. And you mentioned that this is much harder to treat. And we can take, breast cancer as an example. Once a patient reaches that metastatic stage, each treatment tends to be less effective and for a shorter duration than it was than a previous line of therapy. And that's really due to increased resistance and having a more aggressive cancer phenotype. There's really no cure for metastatic breast cancer, MBC, which means that we have this urgent need and an urgency to develop new therapies and novel ways to overcome that drug resistance.
Thanks, Maysoon. I agree. I think with metastatic breast cancer, there's a particular need, in particular as we advance in our lines of therapy, Jamil, we hand over to you to get your perspective on this.
I do agree that screenings are very important, just as part of risk reduction when it comes to cancer and breast cancer specifically. However, I do think that in the current breast cancer landscape, there has been almost an overemphasis on screenings and early detection. But we know so much more now about breast cancer and metastatic breast cancer that you could be diagnosed at an early stage, but actually be just due to screening capabilities, be metastatic and we just not know. And 50% of breast cancer patients do not respond to endocrine therapy. And we're knowing now that hormone positive breast cancers can take decades before they become metastatic. So I think that since we understand so much more about metastatic breast cancer, that it's really important that we invest in research and developing new therapies for metastatic breast cancer.
Thanks, Jamil. I agree. I think we're all aligned here about the need for further research in metastatic breast cancer. It's a great area of unmet need. I think it's important as well we hear from, how the patient insights, and it's so important to hear from you, your view as well, which is a timely introduction to our next topic is how we get greater patient insights. So we know in the last year, it's been challenging to keep up with rapid changes happening in healthcare. And the pandemic has disrupted care and poses new barriers in how we treat cancer. So maybe Jamil, we'll start with you this time. What do you think is the best approach to gaining deeper insights into patients' needs?
I think it's really important that we have team-based care and be more patient-centric in understanding what are the specific barriers that an individual cancer patient will face when, just making sure that they're on that continuum of care. We understand what those best practices are when it comes to comprehensive care, and it's just really important to understand that one size does not fit all and that we have to think about that individual patient. It's not enough to just have resources available or, just saying that you have all of these various resources at a particular center, but really being able to make sure that that patient-clinician communication is solid, being able to connect with that particular patient and understanding what challenges they could be facing in their specific care in order for you to make sure that not only can that care be delivered equitably, but also that they understand and can take ownership and management of their breast cancer care.
Thanks, Jamil. I think some great points there. I mean, I really agree with the one size doesn't fit all, but also so important to think about that the patient can take ownership and truly understand the options available. Maybe Mason, we'll hand over to you for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I certainly agree with those statements made by Jamil. Certainly, it's not a one size fits all, and certainly every patient is unique. And that's why it's really important to talk to patients and patient advocates and hear their personal stories and really consider each patient as an N of one in their own treatment, and really tailor the treatment to that patient. And certainly, as Jamil just mentioned, some patients exhibit resistance, de novo resistance, and some patients have that acquired resistance where some therapies are really effective. It's just really important to talk to these patients, to give them information, to work with the clinicians and really strive to give them the best options for their treatment. And our work is certainly inspired by these patients and their loved ones, and giving them the support they need before, during, and after the treatment, including, it is important to have access to the preventative screenings. And maybe, it's important as well for these new therapies to have ways to monitor and assess the effectiveness of these therapies that these patients are on. So if they are not effective, then we can quickly switch and go to something that is effective. And it also informs our research and how we progress.
Great, thank you, Ms. Soon. I think, you make some excellent points there. I think when you think about treatment as well, it's not just the actual treatment. We know that the unmet needs goes beyond treatment. So maybe let's think for a moment about that. Let's talk about what we refer to as responsive innovation. So as we advance research efforts on behalf of people with cancer, specifically we're talking today breast cancer, we know it's equally essential to respond to their unmet needs going beyond the actual treatment. Maybe you can both share your thoughts with us today on what responsive innovation in breast cancer could look like moving forward as we target areas with the highest unmet need. And perhaps Ms. Soon will start with you today on that one.
Yeah, as you know, we just said every cancer experience is unique. We know that there's different diagnoses and a different experience, in terms of early stage breast cancer or late stage breast cancer and the type of cancer we're dealing with. It's certainly a challenging disease, both in a physical and an emotional sense. And part of our job is to work with the oncology community and patients and patient advocates to really help drive the awareness and realities of living with cancer. From a research perspective, one approach to designing a responsive innovation in clinical research programs is to reflect on the diverse patient population that each disease affects. Sanofi's clinical research program and MBC was informed by 8 panels of interviews with 40 patients with very diverse backgrounds. This really helped us to understand helped us to understand, real world needs of people living with metastatic breast cancer and how we can balance those the needs for extending the survival of these patients and really not impact the patient quality of life.
Thanks, Ms. Sun. I think it's great to hear about the patient panels and how Sanofi really is making efforts to understand the individual needs. I think going back to Jamil's earlier comment that one size doesn't fit all, and to really understand the real world needs will give us such a different view of what the unmet needs are. So Jamil, I think we're all looking forward to hearing your input on this, given your experience and the work that you do today.
Well, I would just say that currently the system can be overwhelming to people with cancer. And, it's just such a labyrinth. I think that there needs to be more innovation and automation as far as being able to meet the needs of patients so that it isn't like this overwhelming labyrinth that they have to navigate through. So, in addition to just the treatments, of course, that are important, it's all of the other aspects that are critical for comprehensive cancer care. And so understanding that, a patient is walking into this new, doesn't really know what they don't know, we can make sure that patient care and cancer care is actually meeting the needs of each patient. And we can get away from the bottlenecks and the disjointedness. And I'm really excited about, even the Chrysalis initiative, we have automation that we're developing as far as, patient tools and provider tools, virtual learning, and an app that's in development that can actually hone in on what are the specific barriers and challenges that cancer patient is facing or that provider is facing in order to address the needs of that particular patient. Because again, one size doesn't fit all, but we can also hone in specifically on what additional support is needed for that cancer patient in order to make sure that they are receiving equitable and comprehensive care. And I think, just having those same old procedural bottlenecks that we've had before, we can increase capacity for providers where we have that team-based care and we can hone in on what those specific barriers or challenges are that can take that particular patient off that continuum, and then also make sure that we can provide that targeted and customized support, for patients to make sure that they have the most optimal outcomes.
Great, thank you, Jamil. Maybe you can just a little more tell me more about the procedural bottlenecks that you mentioned, and some examples. I think of what would be the most problematic in your opinion.
I think what is so frustrating to me is that we see patients muddling through, so they're having challenges with adhering to their treatment. It could be symptom burden or side effects that are impacting their quality of life. There could be insurance or financial toxicity issues, and not understanding that there are resources available at this particular center that could make things easier so that they can stay on that continuum. And we could preemptively provide that intervention, and we know what those telltale signs are. So meaning that if we can make sure that the same way that we're doing that assessment as part of what is the most targeted treatment, but based off of this, all these particular characteristics of this patient with cancer, what additional resources have to be integrated in? And meaning that we don't have oncology teams working in silos, but really saying, okay, this is all that we have to offer. Can we make sure that this patient, if they do have this need, are at least introduced to it so that they know that it's there? And it's just not enough to have it, but to make sure that it can actually be conveyed and delivered to the patient too.
Great. I think, what's really resonated in me was when your first sentences with patients muddling through. And I think that is so true. I think, you think back about how many patients, who put up with side effects or who, just, as you say, muddle is a great word. They get through it by some means. So we can definitely do better on that way. So maybe moving on to our next topic, maybe talk about treatment disparities. So we know there are many treatment disparities existing across the breast cancer community, disparities such as age, disease stage, and race. And we know, Jamil, that patient advocates like yourself play a pivotal role in helping us understand the impact of these disparities and what action is needed to address them moving forward. So maybe we can speak to these barriers and what steps you believe are necessary to address them. So Jamila, I'm going to start with you.
I think the most important thing to address these disparities, evidence shows that we have to have accountability. We have to have transparency where, you don't have most of the bias that we see or disparities that we see are caused by implicit and explicit bias, whether it's ageism or racism in the care setting. And I mean, it's healthcare, we're dealing with people. And so I think it's the acknowledgement that the racism and ageism and bias is not going to go away, but to actually have accountability and provisions in place so that providers don't have the autonomy to just cause harm to patients by this bias. I think also it's important to understand that since these biases are the biggest contributors to these disparities, they do cause harm to patients, meaning that, if a particular patient is not provided standard of care just due to bias, whether it's implicit or explicit, but it's informing the decisions of that healthcare professional, it can really cause damage to, a patient's care. And so I think it's just really important to understand that a lot of the disparities that we have that we've known about, the pandemic really revealed surely that we have a lot of inequities that we need to address. But I think it also revealed that we can't rely on those same narratives where, oh, it's just due to poverty. Oh, it's only due to social economic issues. But no, actually the biggest contributors are the bias and ageism and racism in the care setting, and to address it and have accountability there.
I think you made a great point. I think when you talk about access to standard of care, I think it's something that we would hope would be a standard, that all patients have access to that.
Right.
I think, you raising this as like an issue is just so important for us all to understand this and to raise our awareness so we can start to address it with you. Maysoon, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I certainly echo, your thoughts as well as Jamil's thoughts, and certainly want to expand on that. Certainly there's a need to educate caregivers and clinicians and really have them speaking to the patient and recognizing the needs of the patient and advocating for the patient and not overlooking their symptoms, not overlooking their diagnosis and ignoring the patient. So really listening and talking to the patients, to the advocates is important, and it reminds clinicians and researchers what's at stake here. And certainly we have this kind of trial and error nature of metastatic breast cancer, and that's certainly frustrating for these patients. And there certainly needs to be a better accountability and better diagnosis and treatment for these patients. And that's our goal, is to provide the most effective therapy for metastatic breast cancer and breast cancer in general, with little, impact on the quality of life, but also really to listen to the patient and to have more education around that and more consistent and effective communication with the patient and the advocates to ensure that they are being heard and are being treated fairly, and are receiving the standard of care.
Thanks, Ms. Sun. I think there's some great and very important points raised by you both when you talk about, making sure everyone has the access to what we consider as standard, to understand the impact on quality of life, to understand what the outcomes will be. So I think it's such an important point. I think it's something we need to think about as we move forward in our work, and certainly working closely with people like Jamil and her organization to really get a better and proper understanding of where the issue is. So thank you both for that.
Yeah, and if I may add that, Sanofi as well recognizes that we need to also expand diversity in our clinical trials, and moving them forward, and to ensure that we have representation from our participants as we explore the potential benefits of new medicines and to reach out to those communities. So certainly this is on our horizon, and we are paying attention to this, as we should be.
Great. I absolutely agree. We also need to increase diversity in our trials. As we talked earlier, one size doesn't fit all. We really need to have a true representation within our clinical trials. So it's really great to see what Sanofi is doing in this area.
I also think that it's important to not just have diversity in patients, but diversity in staff. So meaning the team, the leadership, the people at the clinical trial site that diverse patients of color are interacting with, because sometimes if you have just a predominantly white center without any staff of color, they might not have that cultural competency in order to make sure that the site is inclusive for patients of color, or to know specifically the certain challenges or barriers that are unique challenges of patients of color. I think, it's really critical where, if they don't have that knowledge or cultural competency, especially when we go back to just the standard care setting, to pull in those community organizations, or pull in the nurse practitioner, or social navigator, or social worker, or, in order to help with that patient clinician communication, and not to make assumptions. I can say that, most of the participants that we have with the Chrysalis Initiative, we were thinking that initially going in that, okay, maybe this is social economic issues that could be contributing to these disparities. 90% of our participants, it's usually a breakdown or something that's incomplete in the standard of care. So just literally lack of accountability, where just the standard quality of care, whether it's, confirming the subtype or providing genetic or genomic testing, or even if you're a Black woman and you're HER2 positive, to have access to Herceptin, just things that we take for granted in the standard care setting are just not being done, and there's no accountability. And those are the biggest contributors to these disparities that we're seeing in care and outcomes.
You're so right, Jamel. I think there's many aspects to disparities, and we can't just focus on one. That we need to take a holistic approach to it. So again, another reason why your input and contributions are so important, to really remind us where we need to focus and where the issues are. So thank you for that. So as we wrap up, maybe we can talk about the future. How can the oncology community come together to support our healthcare providers and patients in building more customized treatment plans, leading to better health outcomes for our patients living with cancers like metastatic breast cancer. Maybe Ms. Soon, we'll start with you this time.
Thank you, Karuna. Certainly all of these points that we're touching on today are, very important, and it's all about continuing to, drive these points home and to focus on not just the research, not just, as you said, diversity in our clinical trials, but diversity in the clinicians and in the care that's given to these patients. It's about the sustained effort, and having more options, giving patients more options and support when it comes to dealing with their treatment plan and optimizing their treatment plan. Certainly we're hearing this, need to have better treatment options, better diagnoses, better monitoring of patients, and certainly focusing on the patient needs and hearing what the patient wants, and making it accessible and truly accessible to the patients. And I think this is, again, coming back to that idea that we need to focus on the patient and focus on the needs and really hear and listen to the patient when working with them in their treatment plans.
Absolutely, Ms. Soon. I completely agree. And so, Jamil, we're going to go back to you. And again, this question highlights the importance of your contribution and what we can learn from you. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this, on what what the excitement is for the future.
Yeah, I would just say, I have to agree with what Maysoon said, is that it's having tailored, customized support for patients, understanding, that it's a comprehensive care delivery, not just the treatment, but all the other aspects to make sure that they have a good quality of life and comprehensive care plan. Pulling in that support if needed, having team-based care where it's not disjointed, where we don't have oncology teams working in silos, but that everybody steps up and comes together in order to provide the support to patients that they need. And if they don't have, the resources or support services within that particular center, lean on those community organizations, that are out there that can provide support to patients so that they don't have to muddle through. And I think we can just do a lot better when it comes to being more patient-centric. It's, we don't want the bureaucracy or the disjointedness or only the assertive, patients that are the squeaky wheel to only get the best care. And I think collaboration and data sharing is also key. So through transparency and partnership, we can work together to learn more, develop new treatments. And I mean, in metastatic breast cancer, for instance, we've created a point where we have some progression-free or recurrence-free running room, but we, as Maysoon mentioned, we still don't have a cure reach the point where metastatic breast cancer could be considered a chronic illness. And I mean, I think we understand so much more now that if we took the time to collaborate together and understand what we learned, that it won't have to take 10, 15, 20 years for the next treatments and therapies to be developed, but meaning we could really hone in and focus on creating new therapies to extend and sustain life, where metastatic breast cancer can be a chronic illness if not curable.
I completely agree, Jamal. I think when you talk about collaboration and, taking 10, 20 years to come up with a treatment, we think about what happened in the COVID era and just how quickly, we work together to come up with solutions. So I think we've got, a huge amount to learn from what happened through the COVID era. We can't go back to taking 20 years to developing new medicines. So, the bar has been raised very high. So I completely agree with your whole suggestions there about more collaboration, more data sharing. We need to speed up these new options.
Yes.
Okay, so before we wrap, a few questions have come in from the audience. So thank you to everybody who has forwarded or uploaded your questions. We might get through some of these before we finish. Jamil, the first one is for you. How has the pandemic changed the way you approach advocacy work?
Well, surprisingly, the pandemic and working remotely has made me super duper duper productive. And so I am one of those advocates that's really involved all across the board. So involved in science and community and media and policy. And I feel that working remotely has expanded the access that we've had to a lot of different movers and shakers and decision makers. So policymakers, we've been able to meet with them and their teams and actually get legislation moving forward faster. The research, advocacy, and grant reviews, the new projects that are going on have really expanded and kickstarted. So I'm really encouraged when I see, the new research that's being developed for metastatic breast cancer treatments. That really has kicked off in a great way as far as just the number of projects and number of advocates that are being able to work on different projects and provide that insight and make that research that much better when it comes to meeting the needs of MBC patients. And so I think working remotely in this pandemic has just kind of kicked off the advocacy and expanded our reach and access. Which is always good because I do think that it's going to benefit the industry when it comes to just innovation and automation and technology and being able to have better therapies and better patient support systems developed for patients that are better going to meet their needs when it comes to living with MBC.
Thanks, Jamil. I agree. I mean, I think, working remotely, I think a year ago we might have seen it as a challenge, but I think, everyone has stepped up to the challenge and, working remotely is now such a norm. Who would have thought it a year ago we could be so productive? So great to hear that all the work that you're doing with the policymakers and how this has not been impacted by working remotely. I think that's really reassuring. I think, moving forward, then we can only get better and better with this. So, Maysoon, the next question is for you. What has inspired you in this space over the past year?
Yeah, so it's certainly been an interesting year with with the pandemic, and I have to say, I've been really inspired by our researchers and our clinicians that have dedicated, or that are so dedicated, and they're working so hard, during this pandemic. And what we've seen, even though we're working remotely, is that, we've had this amazing collaboration, with scientists and clinicians around the world, including, both the academic and the pharmaceutical industry to develop an effective and manufacture an effective COVID-19 vaccine. It's been so inspiring, and it's happened so fast. This idea was never, thought possible before, that we would be able to, move this quickly through, the discovery and innovation and manufacturing and get it out to patients so quickly, like we did this past year. And what's really been interesting is that we've been able to do this all the while still continuing our research in other disease areas such as cancer. And while this year we're not coming together for scientific conferences and, for the ASCO meeting this year, we've been meeting, virtually at all of our scientific congresses and meetings and sharing data and information and advancing our research, even though we are remote and working from home. And this has just really made it possible for us to continue to do our work and really focus and continue to be productive, all in the hopes that we can discover and quickly move forward novel therapies for our patients to improve their lives, the caregivers' lives, and their families' lives. So I really, see this was a challenging year, certainly, but I think we've learned a lot, and we've really moved things forward and really found another way of working. And I think, again, just keeping our focus on the patient and listening to their needs and what we can do, and really coming up with amazing scientific collaborations and sharing data really is going to help us push this field forward.
Thanks, Mr. I think it's interesting that both you and Jamil have highlighted, working virtually and remotely has not slowed down. In fact, it may, if anything, made you more productive and even, speed things up and really set a new standard for us. So I think that's interesting. I think it's something we can only get better at as we move forward. So we've time for one last question, and Jamil, it's going to be for you. What is the one advancement in breast cancer care that has given you hope over the past year?
Oh, wow. I think that's a three-way tie for me. I would say that I'm very excited about all the new treatments, those FDA approvals, reaching patients and more options the better. We still need to, make more progress when it comes to quality of life and therapies that are extending life, progression-free and recurrence-free. But I'm also really excited about the fact that evidence is showing that just ensuring standard of care in the care setting can eliminate those disparities. So I'm really excited about that. It's, not lightning in a bottle, not anything that's insurmountable, but just standard of care. We have the roadmap for that. And if we can ensure that all patients can receive that, then the disparities and outcomes are eliminated. So that's really excited. And I'm also excited that Congress has appropriated funds for SEER to actually update their cancer tracking. So I know that, to me, I've always thought it was strange that the only stage 4 diagnoses that are tracked are de novo. And so we're not even capturing all those early stagers that, we know a third at least, based off of the data that we have, are going to become metastatic at some point. And so I don't think it really is capturing the true need. And so I think now that SEER is going to be more accurate in capturing that data and tracking cancer cases more accurately and appropriately, that's going to really tell researchers in the breast cancer landscape what the need is when it comes to metastatic breast cancer. There's 600,000 people living with metastatic cancer every day. And so we need more therapies to sustain our life and to improve our quality of life, because 5 years surviving is not surviving, so.
Thanks. I think there's some great points. I think I didn't know about the updated SEER database, so that's something new I've learned today, but I completely agree with you. Tracking patient outcomes and understanding how patients do in the real world is the only way we would truly understand where the unmet needs are and where our areas of focus should be. And I also, I think, again, something has resonated with me as long with the patients muddling through is 5 years surviving is not surviving. I think that is so true. I think we still have so much to focus on, as we talked earlier about, it's not just treatment, it's about what additional supports the patient needs with a one size doesn't fit all, and think beyond the actual treatment for what the true patient journey is. So a lot of insights today, Jamil. Thank you so much for sharing those. And thank you, Maysoon, for your input and conversation. So we are coming to a close. So thank you again both for sharing such valuable insights and exploring what's possible in oncology when the community comes together to advance cancer research and patient care. And I think today we've had a true focus on patient care and really thought about what understanding the patient needs. Thank you to our audience and everyone who tuned in to watch today as we continue to fight against cancer in a post-COVID world. So as we continue to work within the disruptive impact of the pandemic, our health systems and the future of cancer care, we have no time to waste in finding solutions. We have done a lot, but there's a lot more to do. And despite the challenges we have to contend with, we're going to work harder than ever at gaining deeper insights into patients' needs. So today, after this conversation, I'm very confident that we're heading in the right direction. I think we can build on the momentum. We can gain more insights working with Jamil and other advocates to really understand that patient needs, to continually to build on our momentum and deliver on our promise to transform the practice of medicine. So thank you all again. very much appreciate your input and your time.